Hey everyone, I'm back at long last. It's been, well, only 2 weeks, but I didn't really do much with technology in that time. I'm not much of a phone person, so it was like a true purge. I did a full clean of my apartment in this time, so I'm feeling pretty unburdened now. And I'm not gonna lie, once I finally got my computer up and running on Thursday evening, I got huge writer's block. As always, I had some vague bullet points sorted out, but transforming that into a full script was certainly a huge challenge. So I'm lucky that I got the computer back on a Thursday, so I had some extra time to mash out this episode. I know I live in an area that has like 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degree Fahrenheit weather, or colder for 10 months out of the year, but that still leaves 2 warm months. And I don't operate very well on warm days. Not at all. I have to turn off my fan to eliminate background noise, and let me tell you, I'll be extremely uncomfortable by the end of this script reading. Add to that, the Elden Ring DLC just dropped, and I've now got a very entertaining distraction and bothersome heat to stave off while I try to make these episodes. I'm stubborn, I'll make it through, but if there's a weekend that's like 30 degrees Celsius, which I think is like 85 degrees Fahrenheit, I might have to put off an episode while I melt in the middle of my floor. For those interested, the problem was my motherboard, which was a brand motherboard and thus very proprietary. In replacing that, I also had to replace the cooling fan for my CPU, and the subsequent additional parts required a higher wattage power supply. I won't get into the nitty-gritty, but those who know computer parts will understand the pain of all of that. Through all of that, though, I need to clarify that I was really looking forward to this episode. Tenten's a unique character in the sense that she's a blank slate, and I can basically throw her in any direction I want, and no one would be particularly upset. So you would think that that would be very easy to write. It's said that if you go into an ice cream shop and look at 30 choices of flavor, you'll spend like 10 minutes trying to decide. Whereas if you go into an ice cream shop and look at 3 choices of flavor, you'll spend all of 5 seconds to decide. So with Tenten, there's so many options of where to take her that I was sort of frozen at the decision-making process. Rant over for now, let's leap into this episode, finally. With Ibiki's absence from the village, Inoichi Yamanaka was given the former's additional duties. And it was with these additional duties that he found himself now sitting across from Rock Lee. He had gone out on various smaller missions already, but regardless of who he was sent out with, he never gave anyone any information about where he went. Minato wasn't necessarily paranoid that Rock Lee would betray the village, but it was still concerning that the young ninja was being so cagey with the information, especially considering his newfound, strange skills. They were in a private room with no one else listening in. It was key to Inoichi to reassure Rock Lee that he wasn't in trouble, or even that anyone had any distrust of him. They simply wished to know how he discovered these unique tricks. Sighing, Lee looked around the bleak room. They'd already questioned him about this several times. None of this was new to him anymore. He even tells Inoichi the same thing he's been saying this whole time, that he promised not to reveal where he came from. The place he was training was not mired by the violent wars of the great ninja nations. It was peaceful completely. He wasn't about to be responsible for shattering that peace. Inoichi tells him that Minato wasn't interested in sending a raiding party upon hearing the location of the strange village. Shaking his head, Lee notes that clearly with figures like Danzo working right beneath the Hokage's nose, the information he shared could easily be weaponized. Shoulders slumping that one of the village's own ninja couldn't trust the Hokage with this key information, Inoichi frowns at Lee. If you're not willing to share, I've been given explicit orders to find out. Inoichi tells him with difficulty, by force. I'll have to probe into your mind. He doesn't want to, but unfortunately the Hokage's orders trump Lee's wishes. Ultimately, it would be best if Lee just volunteered the information. Closing his eyes and taking a deep, calming breath, Lee sits in silence for a minute. When he next opens his eyes, he tells Inoichi that his mind is now a fortress, challenging the Jonin to do what he must. Lee continues to sit peacefully, allowing Inoichi to perform his patented Yamanaka Jutsu Psycho Mind Transmission, Psycho Denshin. Though it's difficult to describe visually, Inoichi usually tells Ino that this jutsu allows him to float through experiences and memories, as if they're ethereal curtains. As his body travels through them, he gains snippets of the knowledge that they contain. Once he finds the memory that's important to him, he can pause his travel, and the longer he remains within a memory, the more distinctive it becomes. But that's how it is for normal people. Enemy ninja, especially those with important information, generally have seals on them to protect their memories from such probing. In those cases, it was almost as if he could never stop, and had no choice but to glean only the small, rough, patchy memories. In those cases, it took a lot of external physical interrogation to wear the person down. Not only did they need to be physically drained, but various Fuinjutsu would need to be used to weaken their protective seals. The long and short of it was that those who were protected in any way were far more difficult to discern information from, but that their mindscapes essentially looked the same as any other. Inoichi had probed hundreds of minds, and they all had the same quote-unquote look, so to speak. They all had curtains that represented memories, and as he passed through these memories, he learned something more about the individual. As he entered into Rock Lee's mind, he found himself floating through a long, vast void. There were no curtains, no colorful memories of emotion. It was just blank, dark. Eventually, his ethereal body bounced off a wall that seemed hard as stone, and as he swerved around it, he found the multiple layers of memory that were so very familiar to him. However, as he passed through these, he realized that they were simply memories of Rock Lee growing up. How has he done this? Inoichi wonders as he floats through the memories. Somehow, Lee had completely erased the sought-after memories from Inoichi's probing. Lee had no idea how the Yamanaka gift worked, and he didn't have any seals to protect his mind. "Sir," Lee says with a darker tone, pulling some of Inoichi's attention from the probing, "I'm not sharing." Tenten was hoping to help in the battle against the Rock Jonin way more than she had. It felt to her like everyone, including her own classmates, were outpacing her as everyone leaped at the bearded man and fought to keep him separated from Lord Orochimaru. She still had lasting injuries from their collective escape from capture, so she felt sluggish and was only able to effectively wield one of the Kiba blades. There was just so very little she could have done at this point to realistically turn the battle in their favor, other than the slight distraction for Lord Orochimaru. And when Naruto was suddenly thrown into her and she became disoriented, there was little time to recover before darkness overwhelmed her. She thought that maybe she had been hit in the head and was losing consciousness. But just as soon as this blackness consumed her, it dissolved into a field of white. Falling forward, Tenten landed on all fours, in untouched, frozen powder, and sunk in fully. Goosebumps rising from the sudden switch of temperature, Tenten bolted upright, but the snow was still up to her chest. As she packed some of the snow beneath her feet and attempted to climb out of her little hole, she became aware of the wicked winds blasting across the snowy scape. She had the choice of being covered in snow, or facing off against this icy wind. Konoha never had the incredibly snowy winters like this, so she was ill-equipped for the sudden survival scenario. Her first thought was to use the water and wall walking techniques that she'd been taught, but the snow was too fluffy and collapsed wherever she attempted to apply pressure. As she waded through the snow, Tenten thought about how she'd escaped this mess. There was a whirling blizzard overhead that caused a complete whiteout. She couldn't tell the surface of the snow from the snowstorm overhead. She had no idea whether she was near a forest, near a cliff, or walking over a frozen lake. All the possibilities were complete unknowns. Add to all of this were her injuries slowing her down. Her shirt was sleeveless, so short of pulling her arms into her shirt completely, they were fully exposed to the elements. Her ears pricked with pain as the cold nipped her now rosy cheeks and filled her hair with fallen flakes. Every few minutes she had to stop her aimless escape, to duck under the cover of her self-created snowdrift, to rub her arms together and to cup them over her face and ears. These breaks were nearly ineffective at bringing relief, but as she had no other recourse, little was better than nothing. She didn't have time or energy to think about how she came to be here. The elements immediately screamed for her to enter survival mode. Finally, after perhaps an hour of torturously slow travel, Tenten reached a tree and recognized that it was not alone. By channeling chakra through her body, she could likely generate some additional body heat and survive a night, but if she didn't find help soon, she was honestly unsure of how she would get out of this situation. The further she traveled into the forest, the weaker the wind hit her, lessening her descent to frostbite. It grew darker, but for an orange hue to her right, indiscernible through the wall of falling snow. Gravitating to the light, Tenten forged onward in its direction, hoping that only she had been thrown into such an inhospitable environment. It was a wonder that her legs still moved, considering she could no longer feel them. Her arms were locked in a hug around her chest, and her hands frozen in her armpits. She couldn't even feel the resistance of the snow anymore as she blindly trudged forward. "Get her inside," one of the village elders instructed as Tenten nearly unconsciously walked into their little establishment. 3 younger attendants bundled up to stave off the blizzard guided Tenten into one of their various huts. It had snowed so badly that their shelters had been completely buried, but that also added to the insulation factor. It was warm inside, and Tenten would warm up over the course of several hours back to a healthy temperature. By the time she wandered into the village, she was so delirious that she wasn't much aware of anything that happened around her. As she sat in a very furry chair and warmed up, she fell in and out of sleep, and her coherence eventually returned to normal. Expected from her foray in the vast cold, she fell ill, and the people helped her to recover. It was in this time of her recovery that Tenten learned where she was. The village elder that had instructed others to help her was the one to help her gain her bearings. "You've come to mountainside. The village myself and 2 others take care of," the man explained to her while she fought off her flu. "Where did you come from, and where do you intend on going, here in this land of silt and despair?" Tenten was able to articulate back to him that she had been in the land of rock in a fairly significant war. Nodding to her information, the man figured that she must have been teleported here by one of the ninja's fabled jutsu. He explains to her that they are in the east, beyond the land of water. Their country used to be quite warm and humid based on stories passed down through the generations. Legend has it, the Sage of 6 Paths, who supposedly was the origin point for all jutsu and chakra, also apparently walked these lands in ages past. In his path followed the 9 calamities, the great-tailed beasts. And in his passing, his children came and fought. And the ferocity of their conflict was great. So great that it irrevocably transformed what would become several countries along the coast. Shaking his head, the elder remarks that ninja back then must have been very powerful indeed if they were able to cause such permanent alterations. What must the world have been like in that time to allow for individuals to be so powerful? He remarks on various ninja in more recent times that are also more singularly powerful, such as Hashirama Senju, Madara Uchiha, and perhaps even this Sage Pain he keeps hearing news about. What allows for such power in one body? Shaking his head, the man realizes that he had begun rambling. Most of the denizens of this land of silt never wanted to be here in the first place. In most cases, they were born into this or accidentally left behind by other travelers. As such, should Tenten be unable to escape back to home, she was free to stay and make a life for herself here. Few people managed to escape the treacherousness of this walled-in nation, surrounded by harsh mountains. Slapping his leg to remind himself to stop blathering, he tells Tenten to focus on recovery and then think about what comes next later. They got her some winter wear so that she could actually go outside and see how they lived in such an environment. The village was quite small on first inspection, nestled close to a massive cave mouth. She was told that the village extended into the cave, but only to follow where the torches led. There were many twisting tunnels in darkness where great beasts slept. In fact, there were other exits from the cave that led to other neighboring countries, but again, with dangerous beasties in between. Water was obviously all around them, but their food came from a mostly carnivorous diet, since plants didn't really have a chance to flourish here. Unfortunately, they had not done much investigation within their own country to find out where these deer came from and how they survived, but it made Tenten think that there were entrances elsewhere. Or at least, possibly, warm areas that these people did not know of. After learning that they regularly hunted predator animals like bears, Tenten volunteered to aid, since she could likely take one down alone and lessen the risk to the villagers. But the people laughed at her assertion and welcomed her to come along just to see how she'd perform. However, Tenten was shocked to see the hunters leap atop the untouched snow and walk across it as if they were standing on rock. When she tried to follow their path, she sunk straight in, just as before. And it was everyone who looked at her oddly, and she told them that she was never very good at her chakra control. But they reassured her that they weren't ninja themselves. Everyone walked on the snow from childhood, so they never really thought about how they did it. It just worked for them. When she asked how other outsiders fared in this situation, they admitted that she was the first outsider in decades. No one alive today knew the last outsider, and that's how much of a gap of time there was between them. And then, when she went into the mountain to see the various jobs the villagers held, she realized that the mountain was a volcano, as there were various chutes of magma that ran around them. These chutes ran around the walls of the greater inner chamber, where Tenten suspected there might be a full lake of lava beneath. The floor was so warm she could walk around in bare feet, and it still felt a little much. She watched in shock as children half her age dipped their arms into pools of magma and lifted out orbs of pure lava that they played with. She realized, too, that metalworking was a big part of how these people worked. Tenten wondered if the village was somehow comprised of only fire-type chakra users, for them to be able to come so close to magma and be unharmed. I mean, they were physically manipulating it without being burned. It was such a shock to her when she spoke to multiple villagers about what she was seeing, and they were in turn shocked that she couldn't understand what they were doing. This was so normal for them that anything else was abnormal. Walking on the surface of snow and manipulating lava as a plaything certainly meant that they were chakra wielders, whether they were aware of it or not. Which meant that if they could do it, perhaps she too would learn how to. In fact, in order to get out of this place, she would have to learn something. A villager called Fuku volunteered to help Tenten learn the ropes, interested himself in this chakra she kept referring to. He knew about it in very vague concept only. She explained to him how chakra nature works, and how she surmised that this village was probably mostly fire style based on how they handled liquid fire so easily. When he asked her what her chakra nature was, Tenten shrugs uneasily. She explains to him how her teacher in the academy, Iruka, tried to bring out her element. She had some of the most challenges in regards to chakra of her year, and only one student was worse than her. When it came time to generate her element and nothing happened, Iruka put his hands on hers, and the little paper suddenly burned to a crisp. So he wrote down that she was a fire type. But later, on her first mission, she fought with a lightning type, and in their scuffle, her chakra took the form of lightning. And again, no one questioned it. But if she's being honest with herself, Tenten doesn't think she has a chakra type. She's thought about these moments often. She thinks that Iruka-sensei accidentally touched the paper, and that the lightning ninja she fought with caused their chakra to mix. Pulling out her Kiba blades, Tenten explains to Fuku that the blades are special and turn any chakra channeled into them into lightning. So she's been pretending her whole life that she can use some elements, but now that she's surrounded by people who don't even know what that means, she feels like she can unashamedly be honest with herself. Forget chakra control, she doesn't have an element. And maybe without that, she can't escape this country. Fuku tells her that she'll just have to find another way, because clearly this whole village has in order to survive. Maybe it's unimportant whether you have an element. Maybe chakra itself is an element, and those other things are just flavors. Maybe, just maybe, chakra itself is Tenten's element. She furrows her brow at the suggestion and tells Fuku that that's not how the elements work. Fuku shrugs and tells her that before she came along, no one in the village had any idea that they were doing anything abnormal, and she's accidentally shattered this belief. Perhaps her understanding is also incomplete, because there's no way that only 5 elements exist. It's here that Tenten explains that there's not just 5 elements. There are some people with special abilities that have different, unique elements. Snapping his fingers, Fuku suggests that maybe this is the case for Tenten, and her unique element is chakra in its most base form. Again, she shakes her head and tells him that Kekkei Genkai are passed down through generations, and no one in her family has ever been a ninja. Sighing, Fuku suggests that an excuse for why she's not is much less interesting for a reason for why she is. She needs to look at what she can do and turn that into her strength, instead of fixating on what she can't do and interpret that as her weakness. At the end of the day, his people can make 10 spears for 10 people to take down a bear. But if Tenten can do that with one of her little daggers alone, then is that the villager's shortcoming, or is it Tenten's strength? Lightening up at Fuku's nearly futile attempts to shift her perspective, Tenten nods at him and asks for his further patience. She doesn't know how she'll learn what they can do here if her own teacher couldn't. But perhaps a perspective change was exactly what she needed. Pulling her headband from her pack, Sakura finally dons her forehead protector again, after going so long trying to hide herself in plain sight. The leaf sigil was patterned behind wood grain, a strange new design of her still metal headband. In her signature red, Sakura now wore a sleeveless crop top with separated sleeves around her elbows. Mistaken several times for a boy already, her now short hair still had several inches on top, swept to the side by the wind. Still tied around her waist, she's kept a hold of Naruto's jacket, even though he was doubtlessly too big for it now. Smirking, she glances behind in the vague direction of the land of rock, as if she could see exactly what she thought of. Those pesky sound ninja really got what was coming to them. Taking a step forward, Sakura closes her eyes in remembrance of what brought her to where she was now. Finally in the land of fire once more. Another step, and it's evening while she dashes across farmland and approaches ever closer to her home. A third step, and it's night while she dashes from tree to tree. Finally stopping, Sakura feels a tremor of trepidation. The anticipation of reuniting with long-lost friends and being able to donate her power to restore the village to strength. Sakura had been diligently following the news as often as she could. She knew well the weakened state of Konoha. Her experiences gave her the necessary strength and knowledge to turn the balance of power back into Konoha's favor. As the rising sun peeks over the walls of Konoha, Sakura lands atop the stone-sculptured head of Tobirama Senju and gazes down at her long-lost home. And that's the end of today's episode. Just as with Rock Lee and Shino, Tenten was thrown far, and her opening episode was mostly world building. We'll get to see more of this later. As I've done before, in this episode we saw some minor adjustments to the lore of how chakra works. I think the way the ninja world has learned to hone chakra is cool, but in the grand scope of a planet, there's no way it wouldn't be shaped in other ways. In Shino's land, we learned that all living things have some sort of essence, a chakra-tracking element that expands on this very notion. In Rock Lee's Land, we learned a gentle take on how chakra can imbue one's movements and actions. And based on where these three have ended up, if you've been paying a little bit of attention, you probably know where the fourth person was taken to. So the order in which I've revealed these characters was set from the very beginning. A lot of people thought I'd reveal Kiba last because he disappeared first. However, I don't think that's doing justice to our primary characters. Keeping Kiba for last might be poetic torture. We're just a few episodes away from finally having everyone together again. The only two complete unknowns at this point are Naruto and Sasuke, but that'll all change soon. I also did some fairly substantial changes to Sakura's appearance. I want her look to better demonstrate confidence. My brother traveled the world for a year when he was around 25 years old. Before he left, he kept moving out and then moving back home when he felt any kind of instability in his life, because he knew my parents would repeatedly welcome back home with open arms. And then when he went out on his own, he had to find hostels to sleep in and how to stave off the cheats that take advantage of tourists and all that jazz. He came back a completely different person, fully independent and self-reliant, and that was after just 1 year. Since the Konoha 12 all arrived somewhere alone, and were missing for more than just 1 year, their petty insecurities are going to be virtually a thing of the past. For what comes in the near future of this rewrite, the next chapter after this grand timeskip arc, the Konoha 12 will need to be at their very best and hungry for more. The wars are ending, and power has shifted. What's the state of affairs in the Land of Rain? What's going on with the Sound Ninja? What's the Akatsuki been doing all this time, and what are their goals? Finally, we're approaching more prudent issues that will all be answered before the end. And until that end, the sky's the limit.